My name is Melanie, and it's a huge pleasure to be here today, talking to you and chairing this panel. Over the past 2 days, there have been two major issues that people have been discussing. First, how hot it's been, and secondly, how good it's been to be back on the Royal Welsh Showground, having missed out on 2 years. Things have changed a great deal for me since the last time I was on the showground in 2019. At that time, my main job for the show week was to keep my horse clean or to carry my grandfather's bags. But this year, I've spent the last 2 days confirming that yes, I am the woman from Ffermio, and then apologising that I'm not Maynir, I'm the other one. Now, when I took the job on Ffermio, many people asked me what I hope to bring to the programme, and my answer every time is to emphasise how important the voices of young people are to Wales and to this industry. So with that in mind, it's a privilege to be here today with a panel of young people who campaign on various issues, not just in the agriculture industry, but in many sectors here in Wales. So I'm going to ask them all to introduce themselves. So I'll start with Cerys.
Shemai, hello. My name is Cerys Harts. I am chairman of the Wales YFC Youth Forum. My main issues are mental health, as I'm currently a member of the Welsh Youth Parliament on behalf of Wales YFC as a partner organisation. So it's been really nice to work with some of the young people on the subject of mental health, and obviously being in YFC, agriculture is something really important to me, and getting the voices of young people heard in agriculture and rural areas.
Thank you very much, Cerys. Cerys. Hi, I'm Cerys Rees, and I'm Vice Chair of the YFC Youth Forum. I would say that the most important issues to me, as I do represent YFC, then it's agriculture, yes, but also the education system in Wales, and ensuring that that's teaching our children as it should be teaching them. As Cerys has just said, it's good to be here representing YFC and young farmers more generally. I hope we'll do a good job of that today. Thank you very much, Alicia. Hi, I'm Alicia Scott. I'm here today as Youth Ambassador with Keep Wales Tidy. I enjoy singing reggae, and I have a BBC Radio Wales programme on Thursday evenings. I'm learning Welsh and have been for about 6 months, but today I'm going to be speaking English just in case. Thank you very much. And Ellen. Hi, I'm Ellen Jones, originally from Anglesey, but studying at Swansea University. I'm studying Welsh and Media Studies. I'm in my 2nd year, and I'm a mental health blogger and vlogger. So clearly the issues that are most important to me are mental health and the importance of mental health for young people, and ensuring that that conversation is normalized among young people in a way. Thank you all for. So we will now move to the questions. Now, these questions were submitted by young people across Wales. So the first major issues we're going to cover is the environment and climate change. Now, I'm sure that's a hot topic and has been over the past few days, and apologies for the pun, but I'll start with the first question. Do you think that public transport is too expensive? And I'm going to start with Alicia with this one as the Keep Wales Tidy ambassador.
I think now it's not as accessible as it was, especially to young people. I'm not sure on the percentage of who uses the travel the most, but I know for my age group now, a lot of people would more than likely use things like Uber and those kind of things, and then you're taking away the mass travel, and it's more travel on the roads from different vehicles and different things like that, and obviously that's making more of an issue. So I think obviously if the prices were younger, because they weren't too expensive when in my day, So I think as the prices have risen, it's not as accessible for young people, especially to use public transport.
Caris, as someone representing YFC, perhaps in rural areas, transport isn't available, never mind being too expensive. Well, that's exactly what I was going to say. It's not even a chat as to whether it's too expensive, it's just not available. If you live in rural areas like I do, then it's almost impossible to get public transport anywhere. I used to travel to school on public transport and I had to pay because the council couldn't get the bus passes out there quickly enough because there was so much demand. And I think things like that, well, yeah, maybe it was too expensive, but if the system is going to work, then I don't mind paying for that, but I'm not really sure where that money is going. Because particularly in rural areas, there's nothing to show for the money that people spend. So that's certainly true in terms of buses, and we have the Heart of Wales line for trains, of course, but that isn't particularly useful for many people. I live in Brecon, and if I wanted to go somewhere like Shrewsbury on the train, I went just a few days ago and I had to go up to Llandrindod Wells to catch a train. And I think that just shows that it's not a matter of it being too expensive, it's just not accessible for young people, particularly if you can't drive anyway. Is that your experience too, Ellen? I can see you nodding. Well, yes, certainly I live in Amlwch. Well, I actually live on a farm in rural Anglesey, and clearly there are no trains, they're only going to Holyhead. But as someone who's moved to Swansea University, the issue of getting a train home is just too much faff. It's too expensive, first of all. It's about £80 to travel back and forth. And that can be with the rail card, the student rail card, which covers you up to the age of 25. And I'm not willing to pay that. I'm going to travel by car because it's so much cheaper. And even if I do get a train home, then my mother would have to pick me up from the station, either in Holyhead or Bangor, and that's another half an hour journey by car. So I don't think that there is sufficient accessibility in rural Wales, particularly in terms of public transport. What about you, Cerys? Is transport something you feel you have access to?
Personally, I think I completely relate to both the previous points about being able to have access to public transport, because I know that where I live, it's being cut, like your bus stops are being cut from around like the town areas, and it's only like within a town now you can travel from town to town, but whereas people like me who are going to have to travel from rural areas to get to these places, it's virtually impossible to like go and meet with friends in a town unless you're traveling by car. And also I think that what you said about the money, where the money is going, because more and more young people are using public transport as like an alternative to traveling in the car because it's better for the environment. And obviously there's lots of scientific research and factual information that's been like able to back this. And I think that it's so important that the money that people are paying now to use as public transport is used to extend that to rural areas. And I think that would be the best way forward, moving forward as a country, better for the environment and better for accessibility for young people in rural areas.
Thank you very much. Well, the next question is very appropriate given the hot, dry weather we're experiencing at the moment. And the question is, how can we safeguard our water supply to secure a supply during periods of drought? It's something that we will all have to be more concerned about as our nation gets hotter and hotter. Ellen, I'm going to come to you first of all on this one. Well, we know that it's boiling today and it has been for days. And funnily enough, I was having a chat about this on the way down this morning. perhaps because the hot weather is so extreme, it's the hottest we've had for many years. But the driver I was with was talking about a hosepipe ban, and that would certainly be a step that may be considered. But I think people also need to reduce their water usage. Clearly, people need to drink enough water, but we do need to ensure that we make sure that there's enough water available so it lasts. Alicia, is that something that you think people will be concerned about? Because we're having these periods of drought and the fine weather, but at the back of your mind, are you thinking about climate change and why that's happening?
Definitely. I think as well, again, it's about making changes and being a bit more conscious about what we're using. For example, a minor change is how many people brush their teeth and leave the tap on for the whole time they're brushing their teeth. We've only used the water at the beginning and at the end. So small changes like that, I believe as many people that would do that would then make a difference.
What about you, Cerys?
I think I completely agree with the whole thing about brushing your teeth and leaving the tap on. I mean, it's about these little habits that everybody have got into, and if you can break those habits, then obviously it's going to have like a multiplier effect of how beneficial it is, not only to like water supply, even like now where it's absolutely boiling, but also like in the future to sustain the environment that we have. Because personally, I know I've only been like alive for 16 years, but I don't think I've ever been as hot as I have in the past 2 days of this show.
Cerys, this is a particular issue for farmers and young farmers because it's not just us that need the water, it's the livestock too. Well, yeah, I think this is a really interesting question, and it's one I haven't really thought about. I'm not sure about everyone else on the panel. Particularly now, I think we're all throwing water over ourselves now because it is so very hot. But I think, particularly here, there's been a great deal of talk about keeping livestock safe during this period of hot weather. And I do think that the Royal Welsh Show is a great place to have this conversation, particularly with stands such as Cymru Welsh Water. Nobody thinks about water, do they? It's just something that's there. And I think that Cymru Welsh Water have really shown everyone that we have to safeguard our water supply. And you mentioned when you're brushing your teeth and having the tap running. I'm not sure how to best describe this, but I do think that we're very, very wasteful. As a nation, we waste so much. And that's true about food too, but nobody really thinks about water. And I remember just a few years ago that Cymru would give out timers that you could use in the shower, and they'd say, well, you don't need to spend more than 5 minutes in the shower. And that was just trying to help people to cut down on their water usage. So yeah, I think it's those kinds of things that we need to think about, and we shouldn't only be thinking about people, but we also need to consider the livestock too. And I think that's all I have to say on that issue. Well, of course, we know that climate change is having an impact on our environment, but we also have to look forward as to how to resolve those problems too. The Welsh Government has declared that they want to plant trees on 10% of agricultural land in Wales. And Owen from Gwynedd asked, is planting trees on farms the best way to tackle climate change? Cerys, I'm going to start with you.
I think generally it's a good way to start, because obviously with climate change, it's such a big and widespread issue. Like, it's not just affecting us here in Wales, it affects people globally. And I think that planting trees is a small way to be able to resolve this issue. But obviously, once you start with planting trees, it's going to increase more gradually, and you'll be doing more and more to conserve the environment. But I think planting trees is a good way to start. And obviously with agricultural land, it doesn't only like help like with carbon dioxide in the atmosphere, but also with sort of insects that are generally like really beneficial to like agriculture and preserving crops, and just in agriculture in general. I think that planting trees is generally a good idea.
Ellen, is this something that you would welcome? Yes, certainly. I think it is an excellent idea to plant trees on agricultural land, but as you mentioned, it's one step forward and every step can make a difference, and that would certainly help. We need to consider everything that we do, such as water usage when we're having a shower, for example, and I think every minor step would help, and I think it would be a great idea to start planting trees on agricultural land. Alicia, do you think this is a good idea to start with?
Yeah, I don't think there's a best way to start. I think starting in general is literally the best thing to do. So one implement of change will lead to another implement of change. And then growing things on the land, of course, inevitably that encourages more people to do so. My dad's side of the family is Jamaican, and I know so many people live off the land. And the saying is that look after the land will look after you. So I feel like it'll then encourage more people to do that. And then obviously you're eating off the land, that's less additives and those kind of things. And there's a whole nother story that leads on to, but I just think it's a good way to start. I wouldn't say there was a best way. I just think starting is the right thing to do.
Caris, do you welcome this development? There are some farmers who do have concerns. Is this something that you welcome? Well, I think it's very disappointing that the farming community hasn't been welcoming of this, but I represent young farmers and there are many concerns and people are worried about what's going to happen to the land given the introduction of these policies. Now, the Welsh Government has to be seen to be doing something. They do have to do something because everyone has their quotas as to when they need to become carbon neutral and so on. But there are so many farmers who are frustrated because much of the blame is placed on their shoulders, and I just don't think that's right. I'm not sure what the statistics are, but I think that around 70 multinationals across the world produce most of the carbon emissions across the world, and farmers, particularly farmers in Wales, feel targeted by policies such as this. I've read the Lesley Griffiths policy, and she's the cabinet minister with the responsibility for agriculture, and they're going to introduce a new policy for a single farm payment post-Brexit because we're now outside the European Union, and things such as that, where farmers have to safeguard the environment and new policies are being introduced and they have to be enacted on the farmers, and the farmers feel that they're being blamed, and that's just not right. And so perhaps, no, I don't agree that we should be planting more trees on agricultural land. Perhaps we should recognize that it's not really the fault of Welsh farmers necessarily, but the government has to do something. And so maybe planting trees is the best thing to do. It's a difficult one, particularly coming from a farming background. So I think that's all I have to say on that. Well, to move from one future project to another, Seren from Flintshire asks, how can we stop people from littering? Well, Alicia, I'm going to have to start with you because this is the main Keep Wales Tidy campaign. So how can we encourage people not to litter?
I think it's also an education based thing too. So when you learn about how that can impact the environment in different ways that are available to help with your litter, like for me, I always keep my litter with me until I get to a place where there's a bin. But then also I'm aware, obviously through the work I do with Keep Wales Tidy, of things that are not so good associated with litter. And there's times when we've been on litter picks and there's just so many things on the floor. And to me, I just feel like if we start young in schools and educate people on the impact of the environment and the things that it could be done, I think then people will be more mindful and conscious. And then you start in schools and then they go home and tell their parents, oh, we learned this in school today. So if you've missed that generation, you will catch them again through the younger generation. So I think, yeah, education in school should be implemented on the impact that it can have.
Ellen, do you think that there are enough facilities for people who want to avoid throwing litter? Well, no, I don't think there are enough facilities. From my experience, I don't see that the bins are sufficiently accessible, particularly in certain areas. I live in Swansea and I'm a student there. And it's not nice walking around the city because there's so much rubbish around. But I do think that education is crucially important. And I think that educating people is the best thing that we can do, particularly among young people. I do think something should be done about university students because they certainly need some education. We do need to ensure that school pupils receive education too. I think it's certainly something we should be focused on. When I was growing up, I was taught in school where Keep Wales Tidy would come in and talk about the issue, and we'd normalize litter picks. We did that regularly, and from that I learned that no, it's not right to throw litter, and that there are dangers for animals and farm animals, particularly if people are throwing litter on farms, and we need to learn the importance of keeping the place tidy and disposing of litter responsibly. Caris, do you think the younger generation are as aware of the impact of littering on animals and the environment? Do you think that they would be less likely to do this? Well, I'm not sure, really. I've never had this conversation with anyone in YFC, but we, I think, are more aware of its impact on animals and livestock, and I don't want to blame anyone here, but if we look at the YPV and people bringing their caravans, well, there's so much litter being left there. And if you look at the festivals, then you'll see tractors coming through and just getting rid of tents that people have bought for £30 and just left them there because it's easier to do that than to pack them up. So yes, I think farmers are more likely to remove their own litter. You have things like the Countryside Code, and they are aware of just how annoying it is if someone comes on a footpath through your fields and that they leave rubbish there. So yes, I think I fully agree that education is the way forward with these kinds of issues. I think people have tried to fine people, but I'm not really sure how you'd even police that, because if you don't see the person actually doing it, then you can't fine them for it. And then in terms of fines too, perhaps this is a different conversation, but they really only impact those people who don't have much money, and those who do, then it's hardly a punishment at all because you've got plenty of money to pay the fines, so it doesn't make any difference. So I think education, that's the most important thing. And then if we could also have farmers and young farmers teaching people as to the impact it has on livestock too, because the environment isn't just the land, it's the people who live on the land too. Cerys, as one who's still in the education system, do you think that you've been properly educated on this issue?
I think personally, for me, having just come out of secondary school, I think that I don't feel like I've had enough education on like that as a topic, because obviously for me it's just sort of second nature, you know, you recycle, you dispose of litter correctly. I just don't think that even from like a young age in primary school, 3-4 years old, because they'll pick up habits quite quickly if an adult is telling them when they're younger that disposing of litter correctly is, you know, the best thing for the environment, and trying to explain that to a 3 or 4 year old, like by, you know, their parents, they're more likely to listen to someone like in like an external environment in school, and like when their friends are doing it, it's like so much easier for them, and it'll just carry on then for generations. And I think the education in that way is like so crucial in being able to tackle issues like littering, for example. And what Cara said about YPV is like, I couldn't have put it better myself. I think because myself and Caris both have roles within Wales YFC, we know how much effort and hard work that goes into planning an event like YPV, for example, and the sort of aftermath of the litter, and just people, because it's not convenient for them to take it home, so just think if they just leave it there, but then it becomes someone else's problem. And the fact that, you know, who knows, that land might be grazed on for until the winter fair, for example, so the impact it has on farmers and livestock, and then it just goes into like vet bills, and, you know, to just solve a problem that's literally as easy as taking your rubbish home. Like, I cannot stress that enough. If like, even if there's one message you have to get across, is take your rubbish home, no matter where you are on the show. Just either put it in the correct recycling bin or just take it home with you and dispose of it correctly.
Well, one issue that young people is certainly discussing more than any other generation has in the past, and that's the issue of mental health. And we're going to be discussing mental health and well-being, and then education and the curriculum too. So the first question here is, what are your views on proposals for a 4-day working week? Cerys, I'm going to start with you. Well, I've always thought that a 4-day working week should be the norm, because productivity-wise, everyone who's worked 5 or even 6 days a week, then everybody knows that by Friday or Saturday, you're just not as productive as you were on Monday when you'd had that weekend's rest. And I genuinely believe that we would be far more productive if we were working a 4-day week, and it would certainly be better for people's mental health too. I don't think it's necessary for people to be working 5 or 6 days a week. And also, it's not just about mental health. If you think of parents, it's really inconvenient for lots of people to be working for 5 or 6 days a week. And given the cost of childcare, it would be far better if people could be at home with their children or even out with their children, rather than paying so much for childcare facilities. Anyone who has children, I don't myself, but anyone who does have children would know that it costs an arm and a leg. And I really don't think that it's necessary for people to be working so much in 1 week. Ellen, do you think that this will be a crucial step in terms of improving the nation's mental health? Well, I think this is a really interesting question. I'm a little bit on the fence, but I do tend to err towards agreeing that we should be moving to a 4-day working week. Certainly, it's something that would help people's mental health. It would ensure that there's more leisure time available, more time for self-care and mindfulness. You could perhaps take up yoga, for example. And a little while ago, I looked at a trial that had been undertaken, and it did prove that people were around 30% more productive when they worked this pattern. And that shows that people can deliver more and work better when they spend less time in work. And that would give them an opportunity to focus on themselves and to focus on in that 4 days when they are in work. And then when they're not, they'd have more time to relax. And certainly in terms of your comments on childcare and saving on costs in that area, certainly that would be an important element. And also what we were discussing earlier, the environment. If you drive to work, then you'd be driving 1 day less, and that could lead to environmental improvements too, which could be a step forward. But in terms of the other side of the debate, I don't think everyone could work a 4-day week. Doctors, nurses, people working in retail, certainly that wouldn't be possible for everyone. And then I don't think that that's fair, perhaps, because my family, my nieces, my auntie and uncle all work for the NHS, and I know how much they would love to work less, despite how much they love their work. But you see the work that they put in, particularly over the past few years. And that's an area where it perhaps wouldn't be possible for people to work a 4-day week. And perhaps they're the people that need it most in terms of the trauma of working for the NHS. So that's perhaps an argument against, but I certainly think for those who can work that pattern, for example, those working in offices and so on, then certainly it could be something that could be very beneficial, particularly for people who have mental health problems, and it would give people an opportunity to focus more on mindfulness and so on. Cerys, if teachers only worked 4 days a week, then pupils would only be educated for 4 days a week. Do you think that that would work?
I'm not exactly too sure, because obviously I've just sat my GCSEs, and the disruption that COVID had to my learning, and quite possibly maybe the outcome that I might have at GCSE, obviously it's going to be really hard if you count all those days like that you miss on a 4-day week. That would obviously total up to quite a big chunk of learning, and teachers are already under pressure as it is to be able to provide that sort of learning and all the content that you need to sit exams, for example. But I'm quite similar to the previous, and I'm really on the fence about the whole 4-day week. I think it's a really interesting proposal. I think because one of my parents works as a supervisor for the county council, and obviously he's in the office quite a bit, and I mean he finds it quite a stressful job, and obviously him having more time at home to be able to sort of wind down and relax after a day's work, and not being able to sort of panic about what's going on like the next day, who's filling what pothole or something like that, for example. Whereas my mum is the manager of a care home, and that's not a job where you can take a 4-day week. Like some days she'd be in the office just sorting things out, and like there's never a break. And I think for staff who have worked through COVID, it's definitely their mental health that people should be sort of focusing on. And I think although that there's been some focus by the government that the NHS and key workers, they've obviously worked through the pandemic and their mental health needs to be sort of preserved, and that everybody should have some sort of like outlet that they're able to go to. I think that just sort of since COVID sort of like obviously not died down, it's still around, but like since after lockdown, it's just sort of been brushed under the carpet, the mental health of like these workers. And I think that it's really important that we just make it an inclusive proposal that everybody's mental health will be benefited from.
Alicia, as someone who works freelance in the media, do you think that a policy like this would have a positive impact on you, or are you concerned that freelancers would fall through the net?
I think a 4-day working week is a great idea if you can fall into the categories that it can help with. But I do think it's not sustainable for everybody. For example, like small businesses and freelancers, that sometimes I have to work 7 days a week to make sure certain things are finished. And that's just because I work in so many different facets. But for small businesses, for example, might run a shop. Those 4 days they might be running a shop, but then what about the admin if they've got no other help? So that's a really time-consuming thing. So they have to make sure the products are okay or the stock is okay. Get back to customers who maybe like order things online, because that's quite a big thing now. And that's like, that can be mentally exhausting, especially for a small business with no help. So I think if there was to be a 4-day week, there also needs to be some kind of help in place for small businesses and things like that, to be able to sustain that. But for freelancers and people like myself, it would be nice for there to be maybe like a rise in mindfulness, for example, different trials or more things available for us. For example, like free classes and things like yoga, and that's just a small example, but just ways for us to be more mindful, to help us with productivity, just to be able to switch off, even if we couldn't make it a 4-day week, just ways to enable us to be able to relax and to kind of dip the stress levels so that it doesn't have an effect on our mental health. And so that then in turn we have more productivity. And in terms of a school 4-day week, I'm kind of in two minds about that, because I think that, again, yes, you would miss the day of schooling, but then also if you recharge, and for example, children might have extra time to spend with their parents that they might not necessarily have, that could then stimulate them, which then would encourage productivity. And then in the 4 days they do have school, it's less of a stress and pressure on the pupils, because again, especially after lockdown and things like that, there has been a lot of pressure on children to be able to, pupils, to be able to keep up with the work that they might have missed. But in the 4 days, if you really censor that on learning, and they know they're going to get a day off, which is going to be the norm, there's no fear of missing a day. And it's just ways to encourage that around that. And I think we often overlook the fact that 5 days for all those amount of hours, that's a lot of learning time, and pupils will get burnout. So I do think a 4-day working week for both pupils and for people in the working system could be a good idea. It just depends if there's support for those who don't fall into those categories.
Cerys, would you welcome a step towards reducing the length of the school day? Perhaps people would be more productive if the school day was shorter.
I think that that's actually something that could work, because I know a lot of pupils, when our school did like half days, and it was like solid 5 hours of learning and then like a half an hour break. And I know obviously you'd need more of a break, but sort of limiting that sort of time spent in school, I think pupils are more likely to engage and focus in a lesson and just sort of get things done, because they know that they'll be going home, and then there's like an opportunity then for them to like participate in leisure time activities. For example, I know me being in YFC, like YFC is a bit of a 24/7 commitment, but I think having like time to be able to like go and socialize with friends, spend time with family after COVID, and the sort of social aspect that everybody's sort of missed, I think it'll be beneficial for young people's mental health to be able to go out and enjoy themselves after the pandemic.
Well, one challenge to many people's mental health in Wales is racism and the experience of racism. Alicia, what impact do you think racism can have on mental health in general for people of all ages?
There's a number of impacts on mental health, and again, the way as a child, you might see yourself, and it depends also what kind of circumstances you're in. I know for me in primary school, that I was in a predominantly white class, and one child said they didn't want to sit by me because to them my skin was dirty, and I was 7 years old when someone said this to me, and then I didn't realize I was different to everybody else until that moment. So then as you grow, you are always mindful that you're different to everybody else. And then also I've heard the question a lot of times in how young is too young to teach children about racism, but it's never too young for us to experience it. So I think it's good for the new curriculum that's going to be in place, and I'm hoping that that does help to encourage people to just learn about different cultures and learn about different ways of life, which I then think will help this. But yeah, it has a massive impact on your mental health, because if you feel isolated from everybody else, how then do you grow and learn the same as everybody else? So there's so many different avenues to that. But yeah, I'm hoping that the changes are happening and being implemented to be able to stop this from happening.
Carys, how can we work as a nation to eradicate racism in Wales? I'm not sure if I'm the right person to answer that question, but I know that within YFC, I was having a conversation with a member yesterday in the context of LGBTQIA+, but we were talking about having an inclusivity and diversity officer within YFC, and I think those things are important. That's extremely important because, particularly in rural areas, perhaps if you are a member of a minority group, then it can be even more isolating, particularly in the farming community. And we always say you don't have to be a farmer to be a young farmer. And that's true across the board. You don't have to be anything to be a young farmer except a willing participant. And I think it's very important that we ensure that people from minority groups do feel comfortable in coming to YFC and just enjoying themselves. It's a community of people, and if you feel like an outlier or an outsider in a rural area, then it's important to have that sense of community. And I think as YFC Cymru, we have to do more to help people who do feel isolated, and I hope in future we will be doing more. Now, one thing I experienced when I was at school was the fact that when I was being taught about issues such as racism, we were sorted into small groups, and myself and people like me who were from minority communities were taken aside and taught about racism. And I was confused because I think, well, I'm not causing this racism, and hopefully the education is broader now within schools. Now, Carys, you're in school. Do you feel that you're getting that information? And how can we highlight the problem of racism?
I think that it's very similar to the sort of education that's being provided surrounding like recycling and litter, for example. I think it is so important that this is taught to young people, especially because as a teenager, I'm not trying to stereotype teenagers, but often they can be quite arrogant and like that they think that they are right. And I think that it's so important for everybody to have like such like a diverse sort of mindset, and that obviously being in a rural area, it's not like assuming that everyone's a farmer, you know. It's like really important that people are educated on things that might offend people, that might cause harm and like isolate people. I think that it is so important that everybody learns about that. I also think that the education system, obviously now that it's being sort of the curriculum's being developed and the new curriculum will come into place, I think that for younger generations that are coming up through primary and secondary school, I think it'll benefit them positively, because they'll have a more inclusive and diverse mindset before even like going out into the wider world. And I think that that's something, as someone who's gone through like a generation of school with that nothing like that has been taught, obviously like the bare minimum, but like it's now that it's been set in stone that it's something that has to be taught. I think that it'll benefit young people going into the wider world and going into sort of social and employment settings. And I definitely think that that's something that I would have like benefited from going through the school system here in Wales.
Ellen, you do great work in campaigning on mental health, and you've told some very personal stories. Do you think that it's important that we educate people on the impact that racism can have on other people's mental health? Well, certainly, yes. As a white person, perhaps I'm not the best person to answer this question, but certainly I supported Black Lives Matter as a campaign, and certainly racism can have such a profound impact on mental health. So it is important that we educate people on these issues that do have an impact on people's mental health. And I think that that education should be provided to children in primary school, because as you said, you're never too young to learn. And certainly more should be done in education and the curriculum, particularly over the past few years, because there has been greater awareness of these issues. Given the protest and the Black Lives Matter movement, I do think education about Black lives is very important. And I certainly believe that more needs to be done. And certainly I do think it's important for young people to discuss their experiences. I've been reading a work by somebody, I can't remember her name, but she was discussing mental health in the context of racism. And I think people talking openly about their own experiences will help people to reach out and also to realize, well, that's just not right. It's not right that people should be saying those things, and then to stand up to it and to help if they do have those experiences. Well, thank you very much. We're going to move now to our final question. One thing that our generations had to deal with is social media. Now, of course, social media hasn't been around for that long, and we're perhaps the first generation who've had a childhood where social media has been so prevalent. Cerys, do you think that there's enough guidance out there to safeguard you as a young person on social media?
I think that safeguarding young people on social media is something that often gets like overlooked. Obviously, like it's really important, and like parents obviously understand the risks of their child like sort of signing up to a social media platform in like the sense of like safeguarding them in other aspects, but I think they often overlook the safeguarding of their child's mental health when joining a social media like site. Because I know for me, the fact that going onto social media and seeing like celebrities that have been airbrushed and sort of filtered to look a certain way, it's, for me especially, like you feel like you have to look that way. And I think that sort of body inclusivity is something that should be promoted more on social media, because I know a lot of me and my friends are like quite sort of into the sort of body positivity movement, and I think that it's really important that social media is a way that promotes a sort of healthy body image, because otherwise I know a lot of my friends over the past few years have gone through like sort of eating disorders, and it's horrible. And like as a 14-year-old, I shouldn't have been going to school and having to worry whether my best friend was eating. Like that's not something that as a 14-year-old I should be worrying about. I should be worrying about, you know, where are we going to go shopping on the weekend? But I think that parents and children as well who are signing up for social media should be aware of the impact that social media can have on mental health, because I think often it gets brushed under the carpet.
Caris, briefly, do you think that there's enough being done to safeguard you? No, I'd have to agree with Caris. There are so many people talking about the danger of older people reaching out to you on Snapchat and so on, but the real danger is in what you see on those platforms and how you react to them. And I always advocate body neutrality, where people just look like people. We, I think, should all agree on that. And we've said this a number of times as a panel this morning, but again, it comes down to education. Education in terms of what you see on social media, and you need to understand that most of it isn't real. And what you get when you talk to friends and in situations like that, that's the reality. And I think we need to be careful as to how we treat each other. Alicia, what would you like to see introduced to safeguard children who do use social media apps?
A lot of things. I think we were just given internet and just everybody just had to wing it. No, there was no guide of any kind, and nobody even really knew how to figure it out. We just had to get on with it. And then social media came along, and don't get me wrong, for me, for work purposes, it can be a very positive thing, and it's able to spread messages of things that I think are really important and that kind of stuff. So it is a positive space for that. But also there are lots of negatives. For example, like bullying online is a massive thing. And when you're a young person, you might be in school and you're online social media, because pretty much everybody is, and you might be being harassed online or something like that, and you might feel like you're so alone, and then that spirals into that can hurt your mental health and those kind of things. And sometimes you don't want to tell people that that's what you're going through, or sometimes you don't know how to deal with what the issue is or how you can solve it. And there's really no way of, there's no educational things in place to be able to know what to do. So if this is happening to you, what do I do? If that's happening to you, what do I do? It's just kind of get on with it, and no one really knows what we're doing. And again, we were talking about airbrushing and body positivity and things like that. And it can be such a scary place, especially for young people, when they're seeing people who actually may look very different in real life. And then you might think, oh, there's something wrong with me because I don't look this way, but they also look the same way, but online they don't. So you're seeing images that often can be untrue, and then that affects your self-esteem, affects your mental health and things like that. But again, it's just guidance, body positivity. There's so many movements of body positivity now, and I really love to see it. But yeah, definitely more education within schools. Again, because it's a new thing, maybe that's the reason why it hasn't been added to the curriculum, but it's such a vital thing of everybody's everyday life that I think it's really important for it to be added to, even to the curriculum, sorry. Again, because it's such a big part of society now. And then if we tackle the issues of social media within younger people, then it continues for generations. And we kind of know, without having to wing it, how to make it a safe space.
Ellen, the last word for you. There are two sides to this. On the one hand, you can use social media to share information about mental health, and I'm sure you wouldn't have been as successful without social media, but then social media pose a threat to mental health. So as a blogger and vlogger, how do you get over this? Well, yes, certainly this is something that I'm slightly undecided about, because social media have been fab for me in getting my message out there, in sharing my experiences and encouraging others to share their experiences too. I have an Instagram account focused on mental health and awareness raising, and also a website where all the blogs are posted. So that's been a fantastic element of social media. But certainly I agree with everything that the girls have said in terms of social media and body positivity and people feeling that they need to look a particular way. Now, I do that myself. I find myself scrolling through Instagram for hours on end and just finding a reason to make myself feel rubbish when I could have just closed the app down and not done that. So there is pressure on young people in terms of social media. But I think there are people who do good things on social media, such as the Ieuenctid account, and she does a great deal in terms of raising awareness on body positivity, and that's great to see. Because social media, Instagram, it's not real life, is it? So I don't understand why so many people are trying to hide how they really are, and you only see 10% of an individual's life on social media. It might look fantastic, they might be having a rubbish day, and they certainly don't share everything, and therefore it's a difficult one for me. It's difficult for me to come down on one side or the other in a way, but I do see that there are benefits and disadvantages, and they're quite equal. And I create digital content for Swansea University, and that's helped me in terms of being able to work. So there are two different sides to this problem, but I do understand how much pressure young people are facing in terms of their mental health as a result of social media. Well, thank you to all four of our panelists very much. Thank you very much to the Welsh Youth Parliament for staging this question time. There will be a recording available on social media. And of course, thank you to everyone who's joined us. Thank you very much.